Welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic cult and current films and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer's Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lerhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film and pop cultural history one memory at a time. Tonight we are honored to have Academy Award-winning screenwriter Tom Schulman as our guest. Tom can write insanely funny films like What About Bob and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but he's also a seasoned dramatist whose original screenplay for Dead Poets Society won the Oscar. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I have to say that this is becoming a kind of a little bit of a thing for me in every interview where I talk about where has movie comedy gone.
Mm.
I mean, it seems to me that, I write with a partner, and we've been writing comedy, and nobody wants to read it, especially original comedy. But it seems to me that at a time in our history when we all could use a few good laughs, you go to the movie theaters and there aren't really any comedies to speak of. I'd love to get your impression of whether was easier to sell comedy back in the 80s and 90s, or what do you think?
Well, for me, I think comedy has sort of disappeared into the emptiness of our living rooms. I think that comedies play best with audiences. And when you're sitting in your living room with you and maybe a couple other people at most, you don't laugh. The laughs aren't as big. It doesn't feel as good. So slowly people start to favor other kind of movies. I don't think we laugh as hard. I rarely laugh out loud as hard, when I'm alone as I do within an audience, and an audience will sort of bring me along. And I think that feeling is what is part of the joy of a comedy, and also the reason why comedies are just slowly dying on the vine, because most people are watching movies, in the privacy of their homes.
I remember vividly in 1980 going to see Airplane, the Zucker brothers film,
Me too.
and yeah, and just laughing out loud almost till you just got silly with the
Yeah.
whole audience. And I think that, of course, movies were founded on comedic performers, going all the way back to Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin, where people in a theater just collectively laughed. I just hope we haven't completely lost that.
I hope we haven't too, but and maybe if people go back to theaters, and I still think they will. My wife and I were just in France, and boy, we went to see the Coppola film, and it was packed. All the other shows at that multiplex were packed. Every time we walked past that theater, there were long lines. So the French are going back to the theaters. Maybe we will too. I can only hope. And if that happens, I think comedies will come back.
I hope the Coppola movie does better in France than it did here.
Had to be. I mean, it did better in that one theater that we were in than it did in the United States. So I think yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, he's such a titan. And I
Hmm.
just saw the Kevin Costner long film, The Western Horizon. And I'm hoping that at least gets enough positiveness to generate the second film, which I think is supposed to come out soon, I hope.
Yeah, I don't know what the fate of the second film is. I don't know whether they're planning to just release it to streamers and only. I don't know.
So, writing, how far back do you go as a writer? Did you write in high school?
No, I started writing. I took a fiction writing class I think, sophomore year in college, because it had a story professor, and everybody raved about this class. So I took it, and I think that probably was the beginning for me of getting interested in writing stories.
Did
He was
you know what a screenplay was at that time?
probably, I'd have to ask myself back then, and I'd say I would certainly knew they existed, but I didn't. No, I don't think I did. I loved movies, so I was probably just an audience, not really thinking about how they were made, or who wrote them, or because of the cult of directors. I think I knew who directed movies, but didn't know who wrote them way back then. But with The Graduate, I think maybe for the first time, I thought, okay, this I want to know who wrote this. I want to know everything about it, and that may have started it for me.
the Schulmans, are there other artists in the family that influenced you at all?
No, no, my father was a doctor, my mother had worked at a radio station, but there was no, no sign of this in my family. And, I think at first I thought, what disease has he caught, so, uh,
So here we are in 2024, where horrifyingly AI things are creating scripts. Hopefully, not too much yet, although I've talked to studio executives who find the whole concept of buying an AI script horrifying themselves, and
mhm.
that they don't know who originally wrote it, and thus they can't buy it because they don't know what the authorship is, which actually is probably good for writers.
I think so, and I guess legislation and legal stuff is coming down the pike as to how much of AI is anyone can do, because they're obviously scraping copyrighted material and using it to create this their stuff, but it's just little tiny bits and pieces, so figuring out the provenance of those things is tough.
I mean, there could be a young writer out there who types into Chat GPT, can you give me some Tom Schulman dialogue?
They'd be foolish to do that, but if they do, I don't know what they get.
So the first screenplay you ever wrote was,
Oh boy, let me think. I think it was a really terrible screenplay. I think it was kind of in the Woody Allen mode because it had a narrator. It was meant to be a comedy. It was based on my next door neighbor who was a pirate, kind of a benign pyromaniac. So it was, about this kid's struggle to with fire. I mean, my neighbor would regularly unroll the toilet paper all over the bathroom and then set it on fire, and so I don't know what that was about, but yeah, and the interesting thing about that screenplay was that somehow it got to an executive at Warner Brothers. And I got a call saying, come in and meet this producer. I was so excited. I was probably 24 years old or 25 years old, and on a studio lot thinking, oh my God. And when I went into his office, he said, where are you from? And I said, Nashville. And he said, I thought he was just making small talk. And then he said, I have a recommendation for you. And I said, what's that? He goes, go back. He said, you
no
have,
way.
yeah, he said, you have no talent. You shouldn't be doing this. Let me save you the trouble and all the angst. Go home.
That's terrible.
Terrible, but
I mean,
but
first of all, the inviting you to the studio lot with the assumption that something positive could happen.
I know it was devastating at the time, but I lived through it, and I somehow decided. I mean, first of all, I think I thought he might be right about that screenplay, just a tone deaf effort, but it I
It never fails.
persevered somehow.
It never fails to amaze me how stupid some executives are.
I
Just
think he thought he was doing me a favor, just saving me,
wow.
years of rejection and whatnot.
So when you were first starting to write screenplays, were you writing them on a typewriter or
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Writing them
pre
by hand and then typing them
typing
on
them exactly.
Mhm.
No program that would automatically generate scenes, things that like they do today.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
I knew I was doing better when I could afford a Selectric 2, the right IBM with the ball, that you
oh,
could
sure, of
type
course.
quickly, so
I had one, definitely. Now you
mhm.
ended up going to USC Film School, correct?
Right. Semester and a half.
What did was it fun for you being
Uh,
around
it,
all these
it was
creatives?
fun, but and I liked the people, but it was it was odd. I got there and they gave me a test, and I tested out of the Super 8 program, Super 8 making movies in Super 8 into the 16 millimeter program. And then they said, well, the program is full this semester, so you'll have to just take some film history classes, maybe go over to the drama department, take an acting class. So it was kind of a punt semester. just wasn't, I just didn't have that fun. So the next semester was this, I was supposed to make a 16 millimeter film. And at those days, they put you in a crew of three. You would write and direct one, you'd edit one, and you'd shoot one. And someone advised me go last, so the other members of your crew have more experience when they make your film. So the guy that directed the first one threw a hissy fit on the set because we couldn't get the 10K lights turning on and off fast enough. They just don't do that, And he quit first night of the shoot. Second guy quit to become a rabbi, and now I have no crew for mine. So I went to the professors and said, "What do I do?" And they said, "Well, you'll just have to wait another semester." And I said, "This is not fair. I've been here almost 2 semesters, and I should get to." They said, "Well, everybody else in the class is engaged with other students making films, so there's nobody here to help you." And that's it. So I went to try to get my money back. I couldn't get my money back, but I was sitting, and the afternoon that I was trying to get the money back and had left the administration office, I was sitting on a wall, in despair, angry, trying to figure out what to do. And a guy walked up to me and said, "Little Tommy Schulman?" And I said, "Yeah." And he introduced himself. He had been a seventh grade teacher, a junior high teacher at my high school. And he recognized me because he had heard that I was coming out. There weren't many people from Nashville and LA. And he recommended a place called the Actors and Directors Lab, run by Jack Garfine, who was a wonderful acting teacher. Also had directed some Hollywood movies and plays on Broadway. And Jack was in a concentration camp at 16, and 23 he was directing on Broadway.
Wow.
Yeah, a really brilliant guy. And
Puts puts into perspective you sitting on the wall commiserating.
yeah, yeah. So he had a school called the Actors and Directors Lab, which was over on Robertson near Wilshire. And I went over there at this guy's Bill's recommendation. I went over there and got involved, and that really was where I got my education, so to speak, in movies.
They say a lot of reasons people go to the SC Film School is to make connections to people who are fellow students. Did you have any connections at the school while you were there that remained as friends?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, someone who was just auditing classes there, a guy named Tom Benedek, who
Oh,
wrote
sure.
Cocoon and Free Willy and other films. We've
Sure,
been
sure.
friends for years. So,
Well, Dead Poet Society is quite an extraordinary coming out party for you in a way.
mhm.
I read that you were inspired by a teacher of your own named Sam Pickering
That's right.
at Montgomery Bell Academy.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your experience as a student and why it stuck with you so long.
He was my sophomore English teacher, and I had been going to public school from kindergarten all the way through ninth grade. I transferred in the 10th grade to this private school, mainly because they had merged two schools in the public school system, and it didn't have enough room for all the students. So we were two to a desk, 60 to a classroom, and it was just hell. I thought I can't go through this anymore, and my parents agreed. So they put me in a private school called the Montgomery Bell Academy, and Sam was our English teacher. He was probably, I don't know, 25 maybe years old, and just had this smile on his face all the time. He was impish, and just loved. He taught things his way, and he seemed to really like us. There was his classes were always fun, and he would do things like, if we were going to read Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, he would have someone stand on the windowsill. Every time he would go quote The Raven, they would have to go nevermore. Just silly stuff, but it made class fun.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah.
I can't tell you a name of a teacher in my high school that I could say made things fun. I mean, they made things grueling.
Yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
my chemistry professor was a pop quiz nut. Yeah, The
Wow.
whole the whole course was based on these pop quizzes, and you never knew when he came into this classroom whether he was going to give you a pop. So he'd walk over to a fan and lift up the fan, and there would be pop quizzes underneath, that kind of thing.
Good Lord.
High school was very stressful for me. So,
Yeah.
so this was a good experience. So you decided to create a movie kind of based on this character.
Well, what happened was he sophomore year we came back and he was gone. Sorry, junior year he was gone, and everybody wondered what happened to him. And he was a handsome guy, and sort of didn't brag about his sexual exploits, but he clearly loved women. So the rumors were flying that he had had an affair with the headmaster's daughter or his wife. And we were just too intimidated to ask. And had we asked, we would have found out that he just got a better job. He became a professor at the University of Connecticut. But since I never knew, the question always hung, was there somewhere in the back of my mind, what happened to him? And it became that what if that sort of eventually led me to start create a story around him. Not a true story, but sort of, one where the imagination would lead you. So I think that's the beginning. And I didn't really think about it at all until I was probably 27, 28 years old. Started popped into my head because at the actors and directors lab where Jack Garfien spoke or taught, Harold Clurman, who was sort of the grand old man of the Broadway theater, would come
Sure,
about the
Actor Studio, isn't that his
actor
studio?
studio,
Yeah.
and a critic for the magazine The Nation, probably directed 8, 10 plays on Broadway, one of the founders of the group theater, and just an incredible inspiration as a speaker. Would come about every 6 weeks, maybe every 2 months, and review the work of the students at the lab, which really basically meant he'd look at it and go, huh, and then he'd get up on stage and expound about theater and Greek times or movies in the 70s or whatever. He was just he really felt that he had been everywhere on the earth at all times in history. I mean, he was just an incredible mind, so well read, and such an amazing and almost explosive volcanic speaker. He never had stood up there with notes. He could talk for 3 hours, and you just want more. So I wanted to write a movie about him. That's where it started. And I just couldn't figure out how to do it, where that went. I had him as a teacher and students, but the students were all acting students. So it just sort of it was too kind of monochromatic. And then I thought, oh, let's go back and do an English teacher. Let's focus on poetry instead of acting. And that's when it started to gel.
So who was the prime mover in getting the script seen by the right people? Did you have an agent helping you, or was it
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did?
Agent named Jeremy Zimmer, who was at ICM at the time, sent it around. The former agent I had, a guy named Gary Salt at the Paul Kohner Agency, read it, called me at 2 o'clock in the morning, woke me up, and said, "This is the best script I've ever read. Come see me in the morning." So I went there, and he said, "I've been thinking about this all night. I can't sell this. I can't. It's never going to get made. They're never going to make a movie about, there are no girls in it. There's only one girl. There's no sex. It's poetry. The title is off-putting. And he said, so if you want to sell it, you'll have to get another agent. He said, I'm happy to send it out as a writing sample, but." So I started looking for other agents, and all of them passed except Jeremy. And I remember when I met with him, he said, I've read about half of this. I think there are a bunch of actors here at ICM who might be interested, and I can try to package it, put it together." I remember worrying that he would read the second half of the script at some point and fire me as a client, but he never did. And he gave it to one of his to a producer named Stephen Haft, who was sort of an independent producer, had produced one movie for Robert Altman, uh, and Stephen didn't respond to it. And then maybe a year and a half later, he called Jeremy and said, I can't get this out of my mind. I'd like to try to set it up." So he optioned it. And while that was happening, a director by the name of Jeff Canoe had a deal at Disney to make a musical, and he was looking for a writer. And Jeremy sent him Dead Poets as a writer's sample. And Jeff said, "I don't want to make my musical anymore. I want to make that movie." So he and Stephen Haft gave it to Jeff Katzenberg. Disney had already passed on this thing, and Katzenberg bought it. I think he got it on a Friday, and he bought it on a Monday night. And then
So obviously Jeff Canoe did not direct this movie. What happened?
Uh, yeah, everybody's first choice was Robin Williams to play the lead, and Robin wouldn't say yes or no. So it was very odd. It just, he had several meetings with Jeff. He screened all of Jeff's movies, and he wouldn't commit one way or the other. And I think Jeff Katzenberg thought he'll show up. Well, put him on the call sheet. We'll get this done. So they went to Georgia. They prepped the movie. Ready to roll the first day. Robin was on the call sheet, didn't show up. They
Wait, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Wait a second.
Yeah.
You're saying that he signed to do the movie.
No, he did not
No,
sign to do it.
and
They
they
had
actually went ahead
negotiated.
and they went ahead anyway to set up the movie.
Oh yeah, they were just they knew he loved it. They just couldn't. He had hesitations about working with Jeff. Uh, Turns out they were really weird hesitations, almost having nothing to do with reality. It's too long a story to because but anyway, that it he just never Robin, I think they made a deal with him, but didn't close, it wasn't closed in the way they close deals, knowing that he was obligated. It was okay if he does it, this is what he would do it for. I think the studio thought he loves it. He's not going to pass this up, and we'll just corner him into doing this. And that's what they tried to do, and it didn't work. So
I find it almost unbelievable that they would actually plan the first day of shooting and go to all that trouble on an assumption. I mean, I earlier said how stupid executives are. This is even worse than that.
You know, I don't question how they did business. Katzenberg to me is one of the best executives I've ever met. So, if he wanted to try this, I assume they put pencil to paper and figured out how much it would cost them if they had to, shut things down, which they did. They sent Jeff Canoe a note saying, burn the sets and come home. It was cost too much to transport the sets back to LA or to store them in Georgia. So the next day I got a call saying they're dailies. Come see dailies. In the dailies, Jeff Canoe, they took the sets to a kiln, and Jeff had the cameraman shoot the burning sets in the kiln. So those
Sound,
were the dailies, you
sound,
know.
sound, sounds like the most dramatic element of burning in Atlanta since the Civil War.
Yeah, that's funny. Yes, exactly. So
Oh
Jeff's
my.
a character and a great one. But anyway,
It's funny, Tom, because I interviewed him for an article I wrote for Cinema Retro on the 40th anniversary of Rocky. He was involved in some of the marketing materials for the original Rocky movie. So I
mhm.
got a chance to talk to him about directing. So, by the way, in IMDb, it says that Liam Neeson was considered for the role that Robin got. Is that true as well?
That's true. Yeah. So was Alec Baldwin. I mean, but those guys were unknowns at the time. They can't,
Right.
simultaneous with Robin not committing, Jeff had the casting directors do a sort of search to see, who could be another candidate. So in that search, they found Alec. They found, I mean, I'm sure they knew who Alec was. For me, Alec was a total unknown, but he was great, and so was Liam. But they weren't big enough names for anybody
At
to
that
want
time.
a movie with at that time. So
So you get Peter Weir, arguably one of the most interesting directors ever. What
yeah,
a coup that was.
yeah, no, it was amazing. I mean, I was really sad that Jeff was gone. I love Jeff. There was an interim director, so when Peter came on, it was long, 6 months after Jeff had left. So um, yeah, it was quite a quite a thrill for me. I loved Witness. I loved Peter's films. So
Oh, sure, sure.
yeah.
He has a tendency to always create a character out of his setting. It just
Yes.
to be have an influence on everything about it. And
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, I also read something about Dustin Hoffman. Is it true Dustin was going to write, I mean, excuse me, direct and act?
Yeah, he was the interim director. When Jeff left, Dustin called the studio and said, I want to play the teacher and I want to direct it. So thus began about a 4 month odyssey with him, which ended when Rain Man, which was sort of hadn't yet been greenlit, uh, was set to go, and then I don't think the schedule was going to work out to both Rain Man and Dead Poets' advantage. So Dustin was gone.
Sounds like both you and Dustin had the right formula. Um, the movie did really well. I think kind of reminds me a little bit of the reaction of a more contemporary film, Good Will Hunting, in the same kind of style, in a
Mhm.
way. It's dealing with students, and I think people just love these kinds of films. Tell me a little bit about Oscar night. That's always kind of fun. Writers never get much excitement going, and the Oscar night writers are actually treated like citizens. Was it fun for you?
It was fun. I mean, I'm like the character Todd in the movie Dead Poets. I'm shy of public speaking. So while they were calling out the nominees, literally I'm saying, please don't let it me be. I don't want to have to go up there in front of however many millions they brag about watching the Oscars, but then it was me. So and I forgot to thank some people, and Jane Fonda had been my presenter, and when it was over, we walked off, and she was going to take me downstairs. We were at the Dorothy Chandler, so we are going to get on an elevator and go downstairs. And she said, "Boy, what's wrong? You just won an Oscar." I said, "Oh, I forgot to thank these people." And she said, "Well, just do it next time." And I thought, right. So so she took me downstairs, and the elevator's open, and you're on a stage. There are these giant plastic Oscars next to you, and in front of you are bleachers with the press, the Hollywood press. And so she introduced me, and then because she had been away from Hollywood for a long time and dating Ted Turner and so forth, they just started hurling questions at Jane. Jane, what's your next project? Jane, what's it like to be back? Jane, how's life with Ted? She goes, wait, stop. This is not about me. It's about Tom. Please direct your questions to Tom. Pause. Tom, what's it like getting an Oscar from Jane? Tom, do you know what Jane's project? And she goes, that's enough. And we walked off. So, you kind of go from way up here to, okay, you're a writer, and that's that.
So they hand you an Oscar on stage, which is obviously a blank Oscar,
Yeah.
and you take it with you for the evening, and
Yeah.
then you have to give it back to them to engrave, correct?
Right.
Or do they send you an engraving thing that
They
you?
could, but they don't. They put a plate on it, but you take it back within a week or something, and it comes back to you a few weeks later.
Okay, so where is this Oscar sitting at this moment?
At this moment, where is it? Uh, oh, it's in the corner over here on my behind my desk.
Do you dust it occasionally, or
Yeah,
is
oh yeah, well, yeah. It will get.
now Dead Poets Society comes out in 1989, which I don't know if it's coincidentally, is also the same year that Honey, I Shrunk the Kids comes out. So this was a pretty big year for you.
For
Um,
sure.
I wanted to ask you, we have a little bit of connection here because
Oh,
I went over to and back in the 90s I was a unit publicist with the studios, so I was
yeah.
assigned to Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with Randall Kleiser and his team, and I actually had a little fun at that film because at the initial reading with all the department heads, there's a scene in the sequel where Wayne has to find the shrink machine because
Mm-hmm.
he's got to shrink his now giant son. So they go to
Mm-hmm.
this giant warehouse with 12 billion crates in it. And I turned to the first AD who I was sitting next to me. I said, wouldn't it be funny if while looking for the shrink machine, There's the Lost Ark of the Covenant is like on the shelf right there. So he whispered it to the guy around, and it got all around to Ed Feldman, the producer. And Feldman looked over at me and said, "Good idea." And would you believe it? Ends not only does it end up in the movie, but Variety mentioned it in the review.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great joke. Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
cute little thing. So I mean, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was moving forward. Now I had read that it wasn't originally going to be a comedy, that it actually started out as this drama where there were five kids and one of them is killed.
Yeah. That's what um my agent called me and said, I have said yes to this for you. You're doing this rewrite. And I think partly what had happened is Disney had bought Dead Poet Society, and for like 4 or 5 months, just, aside from what we were doing on that, just trying to get the movie made, um, there was no, they hadn't, and my agent said, give this guy some work. So they offered me they said, ultimately what happened was, I think the team that started what they called Grounded was the name of the movie, um, had the idea to do all the special effects kind of analog, meaning that a bee ride would be a man in a bee suit, or if there was an ant, it would be a man or a person in an ant suit. And Disney was skeptical, so they asked for a screen test. And when they saw the screen test, they fired the entire creative team. So, and at that point, Rick Moranis, I don't know whether he had signed on to do a drama. It doesn't make sense that he would have, but apparently he told them, I'm out. And they convinced him to stay in until the day before they were going to start shooting, and they would deliver a script to him, and he would have the right to say yes or no, I'm in or out. So, and that day was going to be a Sunday, and he would have to be in Mexico on Monday and start shooting on Tuesday. So this was 10 days before that. I read the script. I said, turn this into a comedy. And my agent said, you're doing it. I've said yes. I said, this can't be the way it works. He goes, it's the way it works. You show up tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. They'll show you the storyboards and get going. So, fortunately, Ray Gideon and Bruce Evans, had written Stand By Me, were at that time producers on the movie. So they were fellow writers, and they gave me some thoughts about how to approach this as a comedy, and I also remembered that I had broken my leg in high school, terrible break, in the hospital for 3 months, in a cast for 6 more, and surgery and so forth. But when the doctor first came to me and said, you're going to be in a cast, that's going to be what happens. I said, does that mean I can't go to the hayride on Saturday night? So it was just like complete lack of, and so that got me into the script. When I realized these kids have been shrunk, they're teeny tiny. All they're still thinking about was the same stuff they were dealing with. Is Amy going to get to go to the prom with her boyfriend? Blah 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 blah. So then I knew what to write about. So,
Now
but
the little boy, the brother, played by Robert Oliveri, uh,
mhm.
it seems to me when you have a little kid like that, he would be attracting comedic situations by the gross because he's a little kid,
Yeah,
and just having him look at a giant Cheerio. I mean,
yeah, yeah. It was it wasn't. I mean, I had 5 days to rewrite it, so it wasn't that hard in a certain
you
level.
rewrote that script in 5 days?
That's all I had. On Friday, I looked at the special effects on Thursday, and I said, okay, I need to think about this, sort of plan it out. I'll start on Monday. And they're like, no, 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 you can't do that. This thing has to be in a pouch going to Rick Moranis on an airplane by Saturday. You got to start right now. We want to see a draft by Sunday night. I'm like, I can't do that. I gotta think about it. If I just start writing, it's going to be a mess. So I mean, it seemed like every 3 hours, Katzenberg would call me going, can't you start now? Can you just start now? And like, no, I can't start. So on Monday, I finally had it sort of figured out what I wanted to do. Got up, and I didn't sleep for 5 days. I rewrote the whole script in Monday and Tuesday. They read it, gave me notes, rewrote it again Wednesday and Thursday. reread it, gave me notes, rewrote it again on Friday. Friday night, they seemed happy. Then on Saturday morning, they called and said, be over at Katzenberg's house at 10 in the morning. Like, oh my God. I go over there, everybody's assembled. Jeffrey says, take out your script, look at page 78. I don't like this line. I said, how about this? He said, great. Boom, put it in a pouch, send it to Moranis. And
Well, certainly helping your case was getting somebody like Rick Moranis who walks in the door and he's immediately funny.
absolutely. Yeah. So that was it.
I mean, this I remember this summer very vividly because this was the summer of Batman. Everybody was talking Batman. If there had been a searchlight over Los Angeles with the bat signal, it would have been appropriate. And
Absolutely.
this was considered to be the ideal counter programming for Batman because not everybody could get in to see Batman the first weekend. So and my God, I think Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was, I hate to call it a sleeper, but it was kind of a sleeper.
Total sleeper. I mean, look, when I found out the same day the summer schedule at Disney, which was that Honey I Shrunk the Kids was going up against Batman early June, and 2 weeks later they were going to release Dead Poets Society. I thought, oh my God, they're dumping both movies. And I was just out of my mind. I went into Katzenberg's office, and his secretary said, "Well, he's in a board meeting across the hall." And I said, "When's he going to get out?" And she goes, "You look really upset." I said, "I am upset." Well, she said, "Well, just go on in." I said, she said, "Just go in." So she walked me over and opened the door, and now 30 people are looking at me. Jeffrey's down at the other end with Eisner, and he goes, "What do you want?" And she goes, "Tom's upset." And he goes, "What are you upset about?" I said, "You're dumping Honey and Dead Poets." He said, "Come on in and sit down. So we should talk about this." So he said, this will be instructive for the board. Sat down and he talked about Disney's philosophy. When everybody goes left, we go right. When everybody goes right, we go left. Summer movie, everybody thinks a movie like Dead Poets Society won't do well. Well, a lot of people are sick of all the fluff. They want to go see something serious in the summer. We'll do fine. Same with Honey and Batman, just what you said. People are not going to get into Batman. They're not going to have any place to take their kids. This will be great counter programming. He was right.
It's funny, looking at Honey, I Shrunk the Kids today, it's a perfect movie. I mean, it's a perfect movie. I mean, obviously you're getting the creme de la creme of effects, but the characters are fun. The situation is great. Now, did you get a chance to go down to Mexico?
I had a chance, but I said no.
Really?
Oh yeah, every time I've been to Mexico, I've gotten deathly ill, and I just said, you guys can fire me, whatever. I'm not going down there, and we can watch dailies here. Anybody needs something, call me. But I'm, and the first day that they were on the set, I think they had spread human waste on some plateau somewhere, which dried in the sun and blew all over the city. And one guy got a abscess in his eye, one of our crew, and lost his eye.
Oh
So
God.
I know it's horrible. So I'm
It was explained to me the following year because I was assigned to a really crazy movie called The Taking of Beverly Hills, which was a movie that was kind of ripping off Die Hard, but
hmm
they had to build Tony Rodeo Drive in one of the worst neighborhoods in Mexico City.
oh God.
Uh, and I spent 3.5 months shooting nights in Mexico City. And you're absolutely right. Back then it was a very toxic city. I of course got sick. Although if you would have laughed walking into my bathroom, I had 19 bottles of acidophilus tablets that I was chugging every day.
That's
And
fun.
they say that part of the problem with air quality in Mexico City is it sits in the bowl of an extinct volcano. So the air currents really don't move much above the city. So you don't get the trade winds that would keep it in. But
hmm
Honey was such a classic movie. Now I have to tell you that I have a little hobby. I play bits of my favorite movies, dialogue, music, anything in these little collage tapes.
hmm
Some people take the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and their favorite music and they make their mixtapes. I do movie mixtapes. And for years, I had What About Bob scenes on my thing. And I still have those tapes and I put on What About Bob. And I have to say that it is one of the funniest movies I've ever both seen and listened to.
Hmm.
And yet I heard that as classic as Bill Murray versus Richard Dreyfuss was, I heard that Robin Williams was originally going to play the Bill Murray character. Is that true?
No.
No. Oh, okay, good.
Now, Bill was the first person that we went to, and he said yes, and that was it.
See, that's why we're talking, Tom. I'm getting it from the horse's mouth.
I mean, maybe the studio behind Laura Ziskin, producer in my back, did that. I don't think so. We had those guys were really good to work with. Katzenberg was always a straight up guy, and if he said we want Robin, we're going to Robin, you could fight him and you might win, and if you won, he'd be honorable and do what you wanted. But so they were those. It was we said I think right off we want Bill, and reluctantly. They went to Bill.
So tell me how this project started. Was it an idea of yours or was it an
No,
idea?
it was an idea of Laura Ziskin and Alvin Sargent, her boyfriend, later to be husband. Um, and their idea was it's the month of August. What happens? Their question: what happens to all the neurotic people whose therapists, regularly go out of town the month of August? How do they tolerate this? Certainly, some of them, because all the therapists are gone. How do they live for a month? So that was the question the movie answers.
So how much of the story had they worked out before they came to you?
I don't remember. I don't remember, to be honest.
But you had to start from page one, obviously.
Oh yeah, yeah. um, Probably somewhere there exists, a kind of a treatment series of notes, ideas for scenes,
Mhm,
etc. I
mhm.
just, I just don't remember. I do remember worrying that, Alvin Sargent was one of the great screenwriters of all time, and I thought, why aren't you doing this? If this is,
He's not really known as a comedy writer,
well,
though.
that's what he said, and he had also written something that he said was kind of in the same vein. It wasn't a comedy, and he just didn't feel like this was one he could do. So, but I worried that there was some sort of booby trap in the story that was gonna kill me and it, but it didn't seem to have that. So
Although it's not really a direct reference, I'm kind of thinking Roadrunner versus Wile E. Coyote because in a way, Bill Murray, Bob Wiley is kind of like the Roadrunner, and
yes,
Richard Dreyfuss, Dr. Marvin, Dr. Leo Marvin is like
right.
the Coyote.
Yeah.
These
And
are
that's why I used Wiley. I mean, Wiley Coyote, he wasn't the Wiley Coyote, but that was, I just had that Roadrunner because it's like those series of episodes, just keeps coming. And that's why I named him Bob Wiley.
I briefly worked a little bit with Bill Murray on Ghostbusters. I did the behind the scenes, the EPK footage. Bill Murray is in Hollywood parlance, I would think Bill Murray is kind of a wild card. You kind of never know exactly where he's coming from.
Hmm.
Did you get a chance to work with him? Is this another set you didn't visit, or were you on this set?
Well, I worked with Bill. He fired me the day before we started shooting. So,
Really?
I mean, I wasn't really fired, but I was told he doesn't want, we were having constant discussions, shall I say, about the ending of the movie, which persisted all the way through shooting, all the way into post-production. 3 weeks before the movie opened, we shot the ending. So, it
So you
was,
had an alternative ending. What was
well,
your
I
ending?
didn't I didn't have an alternative ending, but ultimately Frank Oz had an alternative ending, and I had several versions of the ending that's there now, and it I think the studio ultimately, I remember when, because what happened was we shot the house catching on fire. Bob essentially leaves the explosives in the house, and the house blows up. Theo Marvin is standing outside and sees his house blow up, and at which point Bob, arrives on the scene. And at that point, the studio said, we don't know the ending. Let's just shoot a plate of the burning house. We'll come back to LA. We'll edit the movie. We'll talk about this. We'll figure out the ending. So, and we'll have Bob and Richard Dreyfuss and Bill Murray shoot whatever dialogue is going to happen next in front of the plate, and then we'll figure it out. So we had screenings of the movie, test screenings of the movie without an ending, three or four of them, and they kept tightening the movie and getting it ready. And they would tell the test audience there's no ending, but we'd still like to know what you think. And then came the time to decide what the ending was going to be. And Frank Oz said, well, if the movie were about a man and a woman, they would kiss at the end. So that's what should happen. And the studio loved that. And I said, there's no justification for this. You can't, that's not going to work. But Disney, being Disney, really wanted it to work, right? And wanting it to work and it working are two different things. So we just started having an argument. They said, well, will you write that? And I said, I won't. Frank said, well, okay, I'll write it. And we shot his ending and we shot my ending. And, we had a test screening where both were tested, and this is what we ended up with. But, I think the studio, and I get it, they wanted it to have a happy ending. And, in a way, the ending now is kind of a dark ending. He's
Well,
never,
it is and it isn't. I mean,
yeah,
it's so funny. How many movies end with weddings? I mean, it's just kind of a
right, right.
thing. I
I
mean,
couldn't, I couldn't think of it as dark. I realize it's
it's a,
arch.
it's the great ironic moment that
Yeah,
he's going to be stuck with this guy for life because it's going to be his
exactly.
brother-in-law. I thought it was a very clever ending.
I
How dark did they want to go? Did somebody want the Bill Murray character to be killed?
No, no, no. They didn't want to go dark. They wanted Bill, and their idea was that when Bob walks up to Leo Marvin, and Leo has seen the house on fire, instead of trying to kill him, which is what he does now, jumping on him, he goes, "Oh my God, you're alive! Thank God you're alive!" And uh, and then hugs him. And then you would cut to the next summer, and there would be everybody would be out on the lake on a boat talking about how crazy last summer was and how they're such good friends now. And I heard that, and I just went, well, that doesn't work. Why would he hug him? He's trying to kill him the whole movie. He's going to be furious. And they said, and I think Frank said, well, he's realized he almost killed a man, and he's glad that he didn't. I said, well, how do we know that? I mean, why would we know that? Why would he be glad he wants to kill him? So we had that debate, and so we shot it that way, and we shot it the other way, the way it is now, and that it just wouldn't work the other way. You'd have to rewrite other scenes in the movie to make that happen.
Tom, when you were writing the script, or even before you wrote the script, did you kind of meet some mental patients who kind of inspired anything about Bob,
No,
or just kind of went with your gut?
no, I have friends, and there's a part of me, of course, that is neurotic enough to understand Bob, and certainly there's a part of me that's compulsive enough to understand that controlling Leo Marvin. So, you just use parts of you kind of imagine. The way I write is that I pick somebody I know from life who's got those tendencies, and then I have them in mind when I start, and then it just goes from there. So,
One of my favorite scenes is the Good Morning America sequence, which is a kind of a centerpiece of the movie.
yeah,
And it's just one laugh after another, and just really a lot of fun. And obviously, you guys got cooperation from Good Morning America. That was
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah.
I always love Richard's kind of reading of that line where they're all talking and he goes, "Good morning, America is coming here." It almost sounds like he's saying it, and then he completes the thought by making you realize it's a show. But I love what he did with that.
So you said Bill Murray was always the number one choice for Bob Wiley. Was Dreyfuss always your number one choice for Leo Marvin?
I think at one time they considered others, we were kind of, I don't,
Someone told me Charles Grodin. Did that name?
no,
No, no.
I think
Okay,
Alan Arkin would have been, top of mind for a while.
sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, but
Now, the story goes, and I've seen a little bit of this, that Murray and Dreyfuss didn't exactly get along too well. Although you hear one story that Dreyfuss actually encouraged Murray to drive him nuts.
no, no, it
No,
was the former. Yeah. again, what happened as far as I know is that we were still talking about the ending. A couple of days after they started shooting, Frank decided to let Bill and Richard, who were good friends, sit in a room, have a beer, and talk about the ending. The thought that they know the characters now, so maybe you guys can figure it out. And I think they disagreed kind of violently, and that was the end. They
One
never.
story says that Bill Murray threw a heavy ashtray at Dreyfuss's face.
That's what I heard too. That or a beer bottle. Yeah,
That's pretty scary stuff.
it is.
Well,
So I guess they really cared about the ending.
well, I got to tell you that when people did go to movie theaters and when people did laugh, they laughed their asses off reading, listening, or watching your screenplay. I mean, that is one funny movie.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, have you gone back to comedy? Is comedy still part of your life?
Yeah, yeah. I just written a sort of or come up with an idea for a comedy that I'm gonna try to get set up to go, as a series, but we'll see,
Now,
and
look at you. You're trying to set it up as a series. It's because you probably couldn't sell it as a movie, huh?
I started working on it, just, fleshing out the idea. And, I keep a pretty good tab in my mind about how many pages a given scene will be. And I realized when I got to the end of like the first, what I considered third of the movie, it was almost 90 pages long. And I'm
Oh,
like, oh my God. And, I'll write every script I ever write is too long. That's okay. And usually 20, 30 pages too long. And that's great. Just cut out and tighten and it always comes down. But when it's going to be, 270 pages long, that's too long. And I realized this is a series. It's not a film. So,
oh, I lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, directing. You've directed. Directing is a massive undertaking. Did you
mhm.
enjoy being a director?
Not so much on Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag, but I just directed a movie called Double Down South, which just loved the experience. It was great.
Oh, tell us about Double Down South.
Double Down South is about an obscure game of pool called Keno Pool, which most people confuse with that sort of bingo-like game they play in Las Vegas. But when I was growing up, and for about 100 years, as it turns out, there was a gambling game where they put a very thin board on 1/3 of the pool table, and the board has holes drilled in it, and it's got a little ramp that comes up off the felt onto the board. And the idea is that you try to shoot like the 5 ball into a hole labeled 5. There's also a double hole in the middle of all that. And when you break, if you get a ball in the double hole on the break, you win double the bet and you get to shoot again. And the bet will double again if you double again. So people who are good at shooting doubles can, you can get yourself in big trouble putting a couple of bucks down on a table and somebody starts doubling up. Pretty soon you owe them hundreds of dollars. If you don't have it and you're in a pool hall, that's what something like that happened to me when I was a kid, left an impression. I played a lot of pool as a kid, so I saw this game and it stuck with me. There used to be a woman who would come into the pool hall, play Keno down on the Keno table with all these guys. Always fascinated with her, and I don't know, somewhere right into the beginning of the pandemic, it hit me. I think there's a movie in this, and so I wrote the script and friend of mine helped raise the money and we made it a low budget movie called Double Down South in Georgia in 2022.
Who
So
plays your lead?
Lily Simmons is you probably know her from she was in the first season of True Detective. She
Oh,
was had a big part in a series called Banshee. She's terrific, amazing, really wonderful actress. Kim Coates is the play who's from Sons of Anarchy and a million other
oh,
things.
sure. I've worked with Kim Coates. Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. He plays the bad guy in this.
So is your protagonist a woman?
Yes,
Oh, so it's a woman pool player.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
that's
And
unique.
the place there, the idea, and this was sort of also taken from life. I had a friend whose brother opened a poker parlor in his living room, and he paid off the police. And so that because and he got a federal gambler's license, so he would gambling license, so he wouldn't, run into the Al Capone problem of not paying any taxes. So he and eventually had to move out of Davidson County, where Nashville is, into an adjacent county, and paid off the police there. And people, there was a 24/7 poker game going in his living room for years. He put his kids through private school and college on just cutting the pot. And he had this idea that he would bring in fancy poker players, legendary poker players, Amarillo Slim and people like that, and let the word come out. So people would come and challenge these guys, and they'd be playing for big stakes, which helped him because just cutting the pot, and they're big pots. So the idea is there's this pool, this house out in the sticks in Georgia where they play Keno pool for high stakes. And it's run down because Nick, the guy that runs it, doesn't care about, who cares what a pool parlor looks like? It's all about money. So it's a dangerous looking and in fact a very dangerous place for a woman to go. But she needs to go there for reasons she explains. And
And
there's
give us the title one more.
it's called Double Down South.
Double
And
Down
it's
South.
it's
Terrific.
streaming on Amazon Prime.
Oh, great, great. We will look forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, this has been wonderful. I feel like you've given us a window into some great movie experiences and some horrific experiences at the same time. But that's the life of screenwriting.
That is.
What
Yeah.
comes next after down what is it, down south?
Double Down South.
Down south.
Yeah, I'm working on a podcast with Callie Curry and Trey Crowder, if you know who he is. He's a stand-up comedian who's known as the liberal redneck, and T-Bone Burnett, who's doing the music. We're doing a podcast called One Lane Road for Audible. It's essentially 7 episode little dramedy that's about a band
So
and
scripted.
scripted. Yes,
Oh, good.
completely
Yeah,
scripted.
I've just done one too. I took one of our many screenplays that have been sitting on very dust collecting shelves. I've turned it into a feature.
Oh,
So
cool.
we're in post now on it as well. We're going to test that water. So yeah, no, any way we can take our writing and just get it moving in some direction, that's great.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Congratulations. That's
thank
good.
you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Well, everyone, we've been listening to Tom Schulman tell us some great stories. You've been listening to Saturday Night the Movies. I'm your host, Steve Rubin.